Uh, a very good afternoon to all those who have joined for this webinar. Uh, I'm happy to share that we have been able to successfully carry out series of webinars till this point of time, and this will be the sixth one in the series. Today we are joined by Professor Devasis Viswas, who is Professor and Head Department of Microbiology at AIIMS Bhopal. We are going to talk today about uh, the new issue about variants in coronavirus and variants in general which appear in respiratory viruses, and to understand what is the importance of these variants. Should we really be alarmed too much about these variants, or this is a process which is bound to happen and bound to repeat itself in coming days? So Professor Devasis Viswas is also heading the regional virology lab, instrumental in getting various RT-PCR tests for COVID done at Bhopal. Without wasting of time, I'll call Viswas. Like,
Gitanjali?
I just request the audience. I request all audience to kindly keep their mics on mute so that the presentation is audible to all. Dr. Devasis Viswas, please.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. I hope I am audible and my screen is visible.
Yes. It's very
The
much
screen
visible.
is visible, right?
Yeah, screen is visible. I think you can just do a full screen. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, as 2020, the year of the pandemic was coming to a close, and the world was expectantly waiting for positive news about COVID vaccines. And we were all hoping that these vaccines would take us back to the pre-pandemic normalcy. There occurred a flurry of media attention beginning in the last fortnight of December 2020 about the emergence of new variants of the virus. There was widespread concern leading to flight bans, travel restrictions, cancellation of Christmas celebrations, repeat of nationwide lockdowns, and most importantly, skepticism about the success of vaccines. Having known that the viruses are known to change their characteristics all the time, in fact, Dr. Joshi only suggested, and we thought it right, to take a walk through this landscape of variants in one of our weekly webinars and try to make sense of how far concerning these variants could be. And in this coming 30 minutes, we would attempt to understand which variants merit our concern in terms of changes in transmissibility, infectivity, disease severity, or their impact on countermeasures like diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. So before we get into that, we are used to listening to these terms called variants and mutants and strains, and many a times they are used interchangeably. So I thought that it would be right to begin by clarifying what exactly we mean by these terms so that all of us are on the same page as we proceed. So variants actually mean nothing but some change in genetic sequence. If there is a change in the AUCG, that sequence of bases in a particular genome, if some change has taken place, we can call it a variant. Not all the time this change takes place in a protein coding gene. So if the change takes place, the change in the sequence takes place in the gene of in a protein coding gene, then we call it a mutant. So if this change leads to a change in the characteristics of a protein, then we may have a protein that is altered, but it not functionally altered, but at least its amino acid sequence is altered. Or it can be that the protein is not synthesized altogether. In that case, we would call it a nonsense mutation. So mutant happens when the sequence sequence leads to change in the protein, and sometimes, occasionally, that change in the protein also leads to change in the function of the protein. As you see here, the change in the physical property of the protein can also take place, and in that case, we would call it a strain. So a genome sequence variation remains the root cause. Everything happens if there is a change in the sequence. That remains the root cause, which may result in a mutation, and the mutation may lead to an altered behavior of the protein, which can be a cause for concern. So in other words, all variants are not concerning. We should not be concerned if some variant has happened. And as we move on in this presentation, we will see a few of them that can be a cause of concern. So why do variations take place? So whenever you do something manually, you are prone to make some errors. DNA or RNA synthesis, it's very much a manual exercise. Base by base, there are enzymes in the cell or in the organism like the virus. Base by base, they make a copy. And as you know, whenever you do a manual copying, you can make errors randomly. So sequence variation is nothing but a natural and random byproduct of gaming. It can take place anywhere in the text that you copy. You can make some errors. It can be in a protein coding region, it can be in a non-coding region also, but variation can take place because of these errors. Now let us say that we have got in the circulation a population of these viruses, which I've shown in the green color. And on the green colored viruses, we have got just one property of the virus, let us say the square antigen we have shown. So this is the population of viruses, and this virus is circulating in the environment. So as happens, as the population gets exposed to these green viruses with square antigens, the population makes square antibodies to the virus. And so the viruses are now at a disadvantage because the population has made antibodies to the virus, and these antibodies are restricting its replication. But as we know, the virus keeps copying and errors can happen. So as a process of that error, in that population of green viruses with square antibodies, some red viruses with triangular antigens have emerged. And these red viruses with triangular antigens, they cannot be neutralized, they cannot be inhibited by these green square antibodies. So they escape the onslaught of the antibodies, they have got a replication advantage. And so what happens, these red viruses with the triangle antigens, they now become the predominant population. So this is evolution happening because of a competitive advantage, and this is called natural selection. In the competition, the strain that is fitter, and we call it strain because now it has got a different property. So it is a fitter strain that will emerge victorious, and that would be the one that would be naturally selected. In the context of COVID-19, we know this is a paper from Nature Medicine, a paper reported from Hong Kong, where they found that 80% of the transmission that happens in the COVID-19, that is done by 19% of the cases. That means of all the infected people, a minority of them will be doing the super spreading activity. So this paper listed some of the super spreading activities. So one individual, he went to a bar, so they show it by the B letter. So, and he infected a lot of people in the bar. Another person, he went to a wedding and he infected people in the wedding. Another person went to a temple, and this chain of transmission went on happening till some infected person was put on quarantine. So they showed that in the entire country of Hong Kong, of all the transmission that took place, 19% of the cases only were doing 80% of the transmission. And this is very important for us to understand the other mechanism for viral evolution. So we know that viral evolution takes place, as happens for evolution of any other organism, through natural selection. The fitter strain survives, the one that is weaker, that just gets culled. Another thing that happens is, imagine this is a viral population with a huge repertoire of viruses. The entire population, this is the reflection of all the kinds of viruses circulating in the population. And here is a super spreader of all this repertoire. The super spreader is infected only with a few strains of the virus. And as we saw in that Hong Kong example, the super spreader will be responsible for infecting the majority of the community. So those viruses that happen to be in the super spreader, they will be carried forward in the community, and then we will get in that community of the huge repertoire, a limited strain, a limited pool of viruses will be circulating. So this is the other kind of evolution that takes place, and that is called the founder effect. So the evolution of viruses take place through the natural interaction, through the interplay between a chance event that is reflected by the founder effect and the competitive natural process of natural selection that I had already mentioned earlier. So coming to the corona, so any organism that replicates, be it a virus, be it a bacteria, or be it we human beings, every organism in whom this genomic replication takes place, there is a chance of error. But if you plot these errors, if you plot these errors on the y-axis and the genome size on the x-axis, you find that of all the organisms, the RNA viruses, they have got a very high propensity of mutation. You see here, they're high up in the y-axis between 10 to the power minus 3 to 10 to the power minus 5. What it means? That means if you copy 10 to the power 3 or 1000 bases in an RNA genome, you will make one error. If you copy 1 lakh bases, you will make one error. That is quite high frequency. And the RNA viruses, and that is why we know that most of the variant viruses that we come across, be it the influenza viruses, be it the HIV virus, be it the hepatitis C virus, they are all RNA viruses. And RNA viruses are notorious for having a very high rate of mutation. It so happens because RNA viruses make more mutation because the photocopy machine that the RNA viruses have, that is the polymerase enzyme for copying RNA, called the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So let us call it the photocopying machine of the organism. This photocopy machine does not have a proofreading activity. If it is a DNA virus or a DNA organism, so DNA polymerase has got a proofreading activity. But RNA viruses, they do not have proofreading activity. So whatever error happens, that sticks to the population of RNA viruses, and so you get more mutations in RNA viruses. Like all RNA viruses, the coronas are also RNA viruses, but they are an RNA virus with some difference. They have got two important characteristics. Number one, they have got a huge genome. 30,000 bases. If you compare it with the other human pathogenic RNA viruses, say influenza, it has got 13,000. If you talk of HIV, it has got roughly 10,000. If you talk of hepatitis C, 9,600. Coronas have got a large genome, 30,000 bases, and they do have a proofreading activity. That is why the rate of mutation is less in the coronas. They have around 10,000 to 20,000. We saw RNA viruses are notorious for around 1 in 1,000 to 1 lakh. So coronas have around 10,000 to 20,000 mutations in a their rate of mutation is said to be 6 times less than that of influenza. But if you consider their large size and the number of cells, the number of viruses that are replicating in a cell, so every base, because of this large size and because of the high rate of replication, so every base will be substituted in a replicating virus within a cell. And there is a paper which shows that this is a diagrammatic representation. Each such thread is a RNA, is a genome of the coronavirus. And you see none of these patterns in this thread, none of the beads on this necklace are identical. No two necklace is identical so far as the position and the character of the beads are concerned. So that's why the coronaviruses, there's a paper which shows that there are more than 12,000 mutations identified in 90,000 isolates. And any two isolates among the coronaviruses will differ by 10 bases. And that happens though they do have a proofreading activity, though the rate of mutation is not that high as we would find in other RNA viruses like the influenza viruses. So a lot of mutations do take place in the coronas, but not all mutations are stable. And now in the era of genome, large-scale whole genome sequencing, we have got databases that tell us that among the coronas, 1 to 2 mutations are accumulating every month that we are progressing into the pandemic. So we have to deal with a lot many patterns, many variants. And if you look at the pattern in which we have named the variants, that was quite complex for the influenza viruses. Say it was very complex. We say H1N1 or say H5N1 or H3N2, but the entire pattern of nomenclature, the entire length of the name is very, very, very cumbersome and complicated. To do away with this and to bring some system into this naming, we have got a very interesting method of naming which is called the year-letter nomenclature, and that's very, very user-friendly. So what it means is that the first part of the name will tell you about the year of emergence, in which year this particular variant emerged, and this will be followed by a letter like A, B, C, D, which will tell you the sequence of emergence. So you will have names like 19A, 19B, which will tell you that they emerged in 2019, and A and B would tell you that A emerged first and then B emerged. And then as we move into 2020, this variants will be named as 20A, 20B, and so on. Now the question comes, when do we shift from A to B? When do we say that now we are done with A, let us call the newly emerging variants as B? So there is a criteria that when the number of variants, particular variant that we are going to name, even that variant accounts for around 20% of the global frequency, then we will call it a new clade. So this was doing fine. Then what happened that you put ban on international travel. So the variants that were emerging, they were not having that global spread. So they put up a new criteria that even within a particular region, like the region of Europe or a particular continent, if a particular variant accounts for 30% for a period of more than 2 months, then we will name it as a new clade. And there are some variants, as you know, they are variants of concern. We'll come to that later. They will have a dual label. We'll come to that later. So clades that have been known till date, 19A is the one that emerged from the bat-like coronaviruses. So they emerged in Wuhan. And then within the year 2019, there was a new variant that deviated from 19A, and that was called 19B. 19B did not circulate much. The 19A was the one that was more in circulation. And then came 20A, 20B, and 20C. All of them had a global spread. And then came the ones, as you put bans and restrictions on international travel, then we come across clades that are more defined within the regions. So we have got 20D, 20E, 20F, and 20G. 20D is in South of America, Southern Europe, and South of Africa. 20E is the one which is called the EU1 strain, that is very much in Europe. 20F is in Australia, and 20G is in USA. Everything was fine, and then came the variants of concern. We will talk about that later. So 20H and 20I. So for the time being, let us understand that in the year 2020, so much is the frequency of emergence of variants. We already have got 9 clades in 2020 alone, and within these clades, there are subclades also. So this is the way that things progressed, and this is the sequence in which the clades emerged. In a lighter vein, this viral lineage proceeds typically in the lines of family property inheritance, where the father acquires some property and leaves it for the son, who then adds some more to the inventory, and then the grandson inherits both and adds further. So say 20A is the father, 20A acquired a mutation from his father, that is 19A, and this mutation is called a mutation in the spike protein. That is a very famous mutation. We will spend some time on that. That's called 614G. So 20A now becomes the father, and it has got two descendants, 20B and 20C. Each of them inherit this mutation, and then they add some more. And these are not spike mutations. They are mutations in some other genes. We may not bother about that. There are ORF genes, the nucleoprotein gene. So 20B and 20C, which are the descendants of 20 derived from 20A, they have this mutation of 20A and they add on further to that. And then comes 20E, 20D, 20F. They acquire some more. So 20D and 20F, they are descendants of 20B. They retain the entire chain of mutations right from 20A to 20B, and then they add some more. And 20G also is derived from 20C. So it retains the sequence of mutations that were there in 20A and 20C, and it adds its bit, and then it will pass it on to its descendants. So very much like a family property line, this chain of mutations proceed, and every generation acquires the mutations of its previous generation, adds some more to its inventory, and then passes this accumulated inventory of mutations to its next generations, and then the next generation does some more mutations. And that's the way the different clades have emerged. They just this much we need to know, that every major clade that we see emerging in this tree differ from its predecessor by at least 2 mutations. We need not remember them. The only thing that they are important for is that they are markers. These are called marker mutations. If we assign a clade, say in your region, if you are from Bhopal, you have identified a new clade in this region. So you have got to identify which mutation it has got, and accordingly will assign it to the clade. If it got these mutations, we will call it clade C. So these mutations are called marker mutations. They have got no other relevance except for being tools for molecular biology, and they are important for contact tracing. That's the entire purpose of knowing these variants. So if we have seen the clade distribution from a longitudinal perspective, now let us take a cross-sectional view, and we observe that the distribution of clade is very, very dynamic. In January 2020, we prominently 19A and 19B, they together comprised around 93% of the total strains, whereas now in 2021, end of January, it's a mix of 20A, 20B, 20C, 20G and 20I, all of them hovering in the range of 10% and 20%. And somewhere in the middle, I have picked up another time point where you see that somewhere in July, in the middle of the year, you see 19A and 19B had been decreasing, 20A and 20B had been emerging. And now is a situation where we globally, this is a global distribution. Globally, we see around 9 clades already circulating, and more importantly, 19A and 19B, they have died down. They are no longer in circulation. They have died out. Okay, so beyond October, you see the 19A and 19B, they are nowhere in the circulation. Coming to India, we find the distribution to be less heterogeneous, with 20A currently being around 60%, and 20B and 20I. 20I is the UK one. So 20B and 20I together sharing the rest of it, and predominantly it is 20A. So the distribution of clades is less heterogeneous, and that is very, very interesting. If we think that we are in September, we were adding around 1 lakh cases a day. And in January, in 4 months, we are adding only 10,000. So there is a tenfold decrease in the number of cases. And that could be one of the reasons that the clade distribution we have here in India, that's very less heterogeneous compared to the 9 kinds of clades we have seen circulating globally. But we also have to understand that this data is derived from the available number of sequences, which for India is definitely modest compared to the population we are dealing with. So, and this is a snapshot of the 2020 clade calendar. This is from a website called GSAID, which is a global initiative for sharing of all influenza data. And there they have got all these clades, all the whole genome sequences submitted, and then they find out the clade distribution. And the dots here, they represent the clades that have been recovered from India. So that's the clade distribution. That's the clade distribution that we encountered. And the only thing that we need to understand, and I reiterate, that it is a whole lot of variants emerging. Their main purpose is that we need to use them as molecular epidemiology tools, and we can use them for contact tracing. But beyond that, these variants have very restricted importance. So now we talk of, having said that most of the variants are just molecular epidemiology tools, here is an exception. This is a variant which we're talking about, that is the father variant of 2020, the 2020A, which we said was the 614G variant. So what happened in this variant is that the spike protein, when it came out from China, the Wuhan variant had an aspartate in this position, and when it reached Europe, we found that it had changed from this aspartate. It has changed to G. So this D614G variant, and gradually we see that this variant, it has emerged in late January and early February 2020, and over a period of several months, this has replaced the initial variants identified in China, and by June it has become the predominant strain, and it is accounting for around 99% of the isolates. So there have been a lot of studies investigating this. How did this variant, number one, replace the previous variants, and number two, having replaced, how did it become so stable that it has engulfed the entire world? It is a globally predominant variant now, accounting for 99% of the variants. So a lot of studies have gone into it, and it has been nicely summarized in this commentary published in New England Journal of Medicine. What has been reflected, and very, very informative cartoons, they reflect the truth here, that this blue one is the original one, the Wuhan one, the D614 variant, and the red one is the red virus, is the variant one, which is we have the G replacing D in 614 position. In culture plates, when you do this, when you inoculate these two viruses in culture plate, you find that the red virus that outnumbers this blue virus. So you get a lot of red viruses emerging from the culture plates inoculating with the mutant one, whereas this blue one, that is far few in number. So number one, we see from the cell culture experiments that this mutation enables the virus to replicate far more faster. And when you do this from the cell culture, you do it in a tissue model, human airway model. There also they inoculated the two viruses together in different ratios. And even in a ratio in which the blue virus was 9 times more than the red virus, you see after replication of these two viruses in the competition, the red virus far outnumbers the blue virus. So definitely we find from these two experiments, one in the cell line and one in the tissue model, that this mutation replacing this amino acid position gives this virus a huge replication advantage. It replicates at a far faster pace. Then they did the animal studies using golden Syrian hamsters. They inoculated intranasally both the D614 virus, the blue one, and the G614 virus, the red one. And here you see that even in the animal models also, the mutated virus far outnumbered. So it replicates far more in the nasal cavities, and there it is not shown in this figure. When they took the lung washings, they did not find the difference. So this made them understand that this mutation enables the virus to replicate far more faster in the upper airways. And so the droplets that are generated from the secretions of the upper airways, because the mutated virus is far more in number in the upper airways, so the droplets carry the carry the mutated variant far more in number, and that is why it has become so highly transmissible that now it is accounting for 99% of the global strains of the coronas that are circulating. So we understand that this mutation leads to a highly transmissible variant. But what is reassuring is then they did the neutralization experiment. These same hamsters which had been infected with the blue or the original variant, they took serum from this wild type hamsters infected with the wild type variants, and they found that the antibodies raised in the wild type, they could neutralize the mutated virus also. So you see here, these antibodies, they do not allow these mutated spikes to enter the host cell. So though the virus is more transmissible, this is not likely to affect your vaccine success, because the neutralizing antibodies that are produced against the wild type virus, they can neutralize this mutant also. So the take-home message for this variant is that the 614G variant, it is the marker mutation for the 20A clade, which is a globally circulating variant now. And this variant, it is more highly transmissible, but thank God it is not resistant to the neutralizing antibodies. So to understand this further, we need to know a bit more about the spike protein. This is the picture of the coronavirus. These are the spike proteins on the envelope of the coronaviruses. These are the structures that have given the virus its name, with the crown-like projections. That's how the coronavirus got its name, the corona. So these spikes, they are very fundamental to the infection process adopted by the virus. These spikes, as you see, these proteins, they are trimeric proteins. So there are 3 such chains together in this protein. What happens is, it is with the help of this spike, if you see up close, there is a kind of head, and then there is a kind of rod that sticks this structure to the envelope of the virus. So this is the one unit of the spike, which is called the S1. It is important to know this. And the rod that sticks this structure called the S2. So the virus attaches to this host cell with the help of this ACE2 receptor. So the ACE2 receptor is bound by the virus with the help of this spike protein. And then one more thing happens. It's very important to understand that then this spike gets cleaved. So there is a cleavage protein on the host cell itself that cleaves the spike protein, separates the S1 from the S2, and then the rest of the infection can take place. In our narrative of the viral infection process, we spend a lot of time talking about the attachment process, but the attachment cannot move further unless this important cleavage step takes place. And then comes another thing that I will talk about in a bit. So this is the spike protein up close. This is the electron microscopic structure of it. The blue is the S1, as you see here. And then there is this yellow, which is the S2, which sticks this spike to this envelope. And particularly in this S1, we have got another very important structure shown in red within the S1, that is the receptor binding domain. So this is the part of the spike protein. This is the part of the S1 unit of the spike protein, which actually attaches to the ACE2 receptor. Having made this attachment with the RBD, then occurs a cleavage. Because you say the rest of the thing cannot take place because this S2 is very much tucked away from the cell. So there occurs a cleavage. As a result of it, the S1 now moves out, and then this S2 comes close to this membrane, this green thing called fusion peptide. It is responsible for letting the viral membrane fuse with the host cell membrane, and then only the virus can get into the cell. So this is how it looks like. So this is the host cell with the ACE2 receptor. And here is the coronavirus coming with its spike. And this is the RBD on this spike. This is the RBD that makes contact with the ACE2. And so if you now have an antibody that binds to the RBD, then the RBD cannot make its contact with the host cell and the infection is aborted. So that is why most of the neutralizing antibodies that the body generates as a result of the natural infection process or the body generates following vaccination, most of these neutralizing antibodies bind to the RBD domain, and that is how the viral infectivity is neutralized. It is very important to understand that following attachment takes a cleavage, following attachment happens a cleavage, and this attachment takes place with the RBD, and this RBD is the size. And this is the gymnastics that I was talking about. So here comes the virus. This is the S1 domain. It can flip between an up configuration and a down configuration. It can flip this way. So as this comes in contact with the cell, and this blue thing, this green thing is the ACE2 receptor. If it is in the down configuration, it does not bind with the ACE2 receptor. So as the virus makes contact, approximates with the host cell membrane ACE2, it gets an up configuration, and following this up configuration, this binding takes place between the RBD. This pink thing is the RBD, and you see this is the RBD that is making contact with the ACE2, and then it gets cleaved. It is no longer required. The virus is now in contact with the host cell membrane, and this gets cleaved. The S1 gets cleaved, and in comes the S2, and this red thing in the S2, that is called the fusion peptide, which actually inserts itself into the host cell membrane, and following this insertion, the fusion takes place between the host cell and the viral membrane, viral envelope, and then the virus can proceed with the infection. So please understand that there are three steps taking place in sequence: the attachment by the RBD, then happening the all-important cleavage, and then the fusion that happens with the fusion peptide of the S2 domain. And unless these three things happen in sequence, we cannot get the full infection. It is very, very important to understand this so that we can appreciate the reason why we are concerned about some of the variants. So we told you earlier that most of these clades that have emerged, they have got no important significance except for being markers for contact tracing. But there is an exception to that, and these exceptions are the 20H and 20I. 20H is your famous UK variant, and 20H is your South African variant. And notice here, all of these two variants, both these two variants, and then there's a third one called the Brazil variant. I'm not going to touch it today. So both these variants, and in fact, all the three variants of concern, you look here, the mutation or the variation has taken place in the all-important spike proteins. In the South African variant particularly, 5 mutations have taken place in the spike protein. Contrasted to the other variants, which we are calling just molecular epidemiology tools, they are mostly not associated with mutations in the spike protein. So if you have messed with the spike, you are in for a concern. So this UK variant and the South African variant both have got significant number of variants in the mutations in the spike protein, and that is why both of them are variants of concern. So before I come to the variant of concern, there is one more thing. There is one more interesting thing that did not have a long story. We cut it short. That's the Danish variant. This variant emerged in August and September 2020. It's an important, that gives an important and interesting twist to the tale regarding coronaviruses being human pathogens, the COVID virus being a human pathogen. This is a story about an animal infection. So it emerged in August and September 2020 in an region called the North Jutland region in the country of Denmark. And this variation was associated with infection among these furry animals called minks. So the virus was isolated from the minks, and subsequently the workers, humans who used to work in these mink farms, they ultimately got transmitted, and 12 such cases were reported. So now it is an important the way that it has happened is that some infected human has passed on the infection to the minks who happen to be the reservoirs now, and now this virus circulates among the minks because the minks are now reservoir. Maybe some mutation has taken place which makes the spike protein of the virus more adaptable to the ACE2 receptor of the mink. So the minks now infect the virus, the new strain emerges in the mink, which now infects humans who are attending to those mink farms. And then this virus from the humans, it infects back to the minks, and again, it transmits among the humans. So there is a kind of species jump, which is a matter of concern, because whenever we are, from our influenza experience, we know whenever a virus makes a species jump, it is in for some significant mutations that enables the virus to jump from one species to another. So species jump happening means multiple mutations, and when it was sequenced, this was the characteristic mutation again in the spike protein, and they thought that this can be a cause of concern. So though the virus with this mink strain of the virus, though it was similarly transmissible, it was not that highly transmissible as we saw in case of the 614G variant. It had got similar pathogenicity, but it was found to have reduced viral neutralization in humans with the antibodies. So a drastic step was taken by those governments, and 17 million minks, 17 million of these animals were culled so that the variant does not spread further. And now we do not get any more cases of the Danish variant. So this was a variant that we ended. And now let us talk of the two variants that we are mostly concerned about. So first I'll talk about the UK variant. This was a variant which was reported on the 14th of December 2020 when the authorities of United Kingdom reported to WHO that a variant which they referred to as VOC, or variant of concern 2020-12/01. 2020-12 means December 2020. So they named it 2020-12/01 VOC, variant of concern. And this variant, it was not related to what was circulating in the UK previously. It was a totally unrelated strain that emerged, and they found that it emerged from the southeast of England in the region of Kent. Very swiftly it reached London and then the whole of UK. And now, as far as the latest figure of 25th January that I have, 70 countries including India, it has got India of the total sequences, we have around 20% UK variants circulating from Indian sequenced strains. So it is a highly transmissible virus. It has a highly transmissible virus. That was the first characteristic of the UK variant that came into our notice. Secondly, what was found and what was remarkable was that normally we know that every variant accumulates around 8 to 10 mutations. This was a variant that prior to detection, this has acquired 23 different variants. 23 positions of variation have occurred in this variant prior to its detection. And more importantly, we talked about the importance of the spike and the receptor binding domain. There was a mutation taking place in the receptor binding domain, the 501 position of the spike protein. The asparagine was replaced by tyrosine. So that was something that was found to increase the binding of this variant to the ACE2, and that's why we understand that if the binding to the receptor is increased for some reason, we are in for higher transmissibility. So the N501Y, this was a mutation that was used to name this virus 501Y.V1 because it is the first variant. So this was the variant that increased its binding to the ACE2, and that's how the variant became some more transmissible. Though it was more transmissible, there was no change in the disease severity. But what was important was that there was a phenomena called spike drop. Those who are associated with the diagnostic process, we know that one of the target genes that are used in the PCR for diagnosis of COVID, that's the spike protein. this variant had a deletion in this position of the spike protein, which is called the 6970 deletion. So what was happening, the labs noticed that they were detecting cases in which the spike gene was not being detected, and that was described as a spike drop. So this is an important thing from the diagnostic point of view, that this variant is associated with spike drop, and soon after the emergence of this variant, you find there is a steady rise in the number of cases in which the PCR was not detecting the spike protein. The diagnosis was taking place with the help of the other genes like the nucleoprotein or the ORF genes. So this is the story of the UK variant. We come to the South African variant, and that's the last variant we would talk about today. The South African variant, it was noticed towards the beginning of November 2020 that South Africa was experiencing an increasing surge of cases. The country had had its peak towards the end of July. That was the first wave. And then again, after November, a second wave was emerging in South Africa, particularly in 3 provinces called the Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal provinces. This had become the predominant variant. A new variant had emerged. It had become the predominant variant, and that from those provinces, it had spread out to 31 countries by 25th of January 2020. So South Africa has named this variant. This variant also has the 501Y variant, but it is the version 2. So they named it 501.V2. They named it 501.V2 because this also has the N501 mutation, but it is different from the South African, from the UK variant. It is different because in addition to this important mutation in the receptor binding domain, it has got 2 more mutations in the receptor binding domain of this spike protein. So there are 3 mutations in the receptor binding domain. We had 1 mutation in the RBD of the UK variant. Here in South African variant, we have 3 mutations in RBD. One of the effect of one of these mutations is that it leads to increased binding, somewhat increased binding to the ACE2. So one effect is that it increases the transmissibility, but more importantly, this E484K mutation that is found to affect the neutralization of this variant by antibodies, and that is something which the entire world is very, very worried about because it can reduce the efficacy of the vaccine, and we will see it in detail in the next slide. So considering that the spike is the vaccine candidate in COVID and neutralizing antibodies to the spike are the key determinants of protective response, it becomes concerning when we come across variants with mutations in the spike region. This South African variant has got 9 mutations in the spike. Most of it in the S1 region, which has the RBD. The South African variant has got 9 mutations in the spike, 8 of which are in the S1, and of them 3 are in the RBD. And the UK variant has got 8 mutations in the entire spike, but they are not concentrated in the S1. They are scattered throughout the length of the spike protein. So in this paper, the authors looked at the effect of the individual mutations on this binding capacity of the antibodies. So they did 2 sets of experiments. They did many other experiments. I'll just talk about 2 important ones. So they took convalescent sera from patients who had recovered 6 weeks following recovery with COVID. They took convalescent sera from a set of 10 severe patients and 10 non-severe patients. So they took 20 convalescent sera, and they found that there was around 3-fold drop in the binding of the antibodies recovered in the convalescent sera to the UK variant. So there was a modest drop in the neutralizing capacity of the convalescent sera to the UK variant, but this drop was much more significant, much more worrisome in the South African variant. You see the drop is around 33-fold for these sera from the convalescent sera of the severe patients when they are made to react with the South African variant. And for the non-severe patients, it's an 11-fold drop. So this is something worrying, that the antibodies are not neutralizing the South African variant that effectively. And then they also took some sera from people who have received the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine, and the same findings were replicated, that for the UK variant, the vaccine recipients had a twofold drop in the neutralizing capacity, whereas for the South African variant, the drop was far more significant. It was around 6 to 9-fold drop in the binding capacity of these antibodies. So this is something that has got the world worrying, that is the South African variant, if not controlled properly, going to defeat the hope that we have around the efficacy of the vaccines. And the third variant, the Brazil variant, that also has got the same 2 mutations as the South African variant, the E484K mutation and the N501Y mutation. So both the E484K mutation, that is being attributed to maximum resistance for the neutralizing capacity of the antibodies. So we understand that emergence of variants is an ongoing phenomenon in the viral world. They keep happening all the time, and if they make it to the headlines, the medical community, we need to be discerning, to examine if these variants, they merit our concern or not. And the reasons we should be concerned about could be threefold. Number one, if the variant is more transmissible. Number two, if the variant is more pathogenic, capable of causing more severe disease, more death, more hospitalization, more severe pneumonia. And number three, if the variant can evade our countermeasures in the form of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. If they do any of these three, then the variants matter. Otherwise, viral variation is no news, leave alone being breaking news. I thank you very much for your attention, and thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Debashish. That was a very informative talk about variations in coronavirus and other respiratory infections. I had a small query. If mutant is more transmissible but causes less severe disease, won't it act like a vaccine?
It can. It depends on the population that you are talking about. If it is more transmissible and it is an attenuated variant, then it can boost your herd immunity. But you also have to consider that there will be members in that population who will be immunocompromised and who will be susceptible to that attenuated variant also. So definitely, if we can engineer such a variant in the lab that is totally attenuated, though it retains its transmissibility, that can be an immune boosting approach. But as of now, it looks like very far-fetched, because the virus on its own would not evolve to be a variant which makes itself weak. The virus would definitely try to evolve to be a variant which is transmissible and which causes which survives in this game of evolution. So it could be a possibility, but I'm not sure whether it will practically be an immune boosting variant or not.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Welcome if there are any other queries from other members in the audience. Maybe Daniel, if you have some queries which you have collected from other members, please. So I think for all participants and maybe even for wider audience, we make recordings of these webinars available. I think we have one query which is available. Are there any India-specific variation which is spreading or pathogenic?
So far as the sequences that we have in the database, there is no such variant that is typical of India. We have 4 of the 9 clades that are globally circulating in India. So probably there are some variants that have not reached India. And the global database, the available database does not talk of any variant that is restricted to India.
Okay, great. So I guess continuing what I was saying earlier, we make recordings of all our webinars available through our website. So we will also be circulating those links, and I guess it will be educative and informative as the world expands, as far as knowledge also expands about variants and how they behave. And before we end, I'll just take two quick and related questions. That vaccines which we are using in India, say the AstraZeneca vaccine or Covaxin, which could they be better to deal with variants as compared to Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, or it doesn't really matter? That's one question for the audience.
We don't have the evidence base to answer any question related to relative efficacy of the vaccines. We don't have any study that says that vaccine A will be performing better or is expected to perform better compared to vaccine B. As of now, we know that the variants that have, barring the South African and the Brazil variant, barring these two variants, all the other vaccines, including the AstraZeneca vaccine being given in India, all the vaccines are supposed to work against the other variants, barring somewhat reduced efficacy. The UK variant should be fine. The 614G variant should be fine for all the vaccines. But Brazil variant and South African variant, there could be a reason for worry. And that is why it is very important to restrict the transmission of those two variants.
Great. So I'll thank Professor Debashish Biswas, and I'll thank all audiences who have viewed this webinar and who have participated in this webinar for their participation. I hope we'll continue the series of informative discussions in future as well. Thanks a lot, Professor Biswas, sir. Please.
Thank you. Thank you.